Hello, my name is Maxine Moffat, and you are tuned in to Bridge Africa this week, the program that connects you to Africa's top headline stories, from economics to politics, sports to culture. Our top news stories this week include: Miss Obama visited Liberia to highlight the plight of girls. Boko Haram devised new strategies to hit its targets. White Africa uses music to fight for vulnerable people. Thank you so much for tuning in to Bridge Africa this week. Our program will begin right after this break. U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama made a historic visit to Liberia, held talks with President Sirleaf and with young Liberian girls to promote education.
Accompanied by her daughters Malia, Sasha, and her mother, Marian Robinson, Mrs. Obama, in persistence of her legacy program, Girls Leading Our World, strive to promote girls' education. President Obama and the First Lady in March 2015 launched Let Girls Learn, a U.S. government initiative aimed at ensuring young girls across the world to attain a quality education that empowers them to reach their full potential. The initiative brings together the U.S. Department of State, U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, Peace Corps, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and other agencies to address the range of challenges both in and out of the classroom that made it difficult for over 62 million girls to get the education they deserve. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf held a closed-door meeting with Mrs. Obama at the Roberts International Airport, where she was formally welcomed to Liberia. Mrs. Obama indicated she was thrilled that new investments are being made toward adolescent girls' education and deepening the partnership with the government of Liberia. Speaking in Kakata during an interactive session with participants of the GLOW program, Mrs. Obama pointed out that her visit to Liberia is aimed at having an insight into work being done by Peace Corps volunteers in the country, and also to see how Liberian girls are progressing with their educational break. The young girls shared their personal experiences in pursuit of an education with both President Sirleaf and Mrs. Obama, who encouraged the girls and provided inspiration and motivation to them. The First Lady, Michelle Obama, is in Morocco on the latest leg of her African tour to promote girls' education.
The defense headquarters of the Nigerian army disclosed that Boko Haram terrorists disguised as hunters were looking to inflict terror on local communities.
After being smoked out of the Sambisa forest, the terrorists, in their desperation to inflict havoc on innocent Nigerians and to remain relevant, devised new tactics of dressing like vigilantes or hunters to deceive unsuspected members of the public. According to a statement on the website of the Nigerian Defense Headquarters, the terrorists, by their recent modus operandi, tried to escape detection following the coordinated military belligerence against the remnants of Boko Haram terrorists in the Sambisa forest. A mass shooting in Kudakaya village in the Adamawa state was reported to be the handiwork of Boko Haram terrorists dressed like vigilantes, but later opened fire on aesthetic people during a ceremony. The latest attempt on soft targets in Maiduguri, capital of Borno State, was averted by vigilante groups who stopped two suspicious men from joining the Ramadan prayers early Monday morning. Local sources disclosed the suspect later detonated their bombs outside the mosque and died. There have been similar detonations in the recent past where the bombers had only succeeded in killing themselves.
The United Nations peacekeeping mission in Liberia declared their exit from the country. The task to ensure proper security was left to the country's forces that had been training and working in cooperation with the UN troops.
According to Eugene Natwe, the country's Minister of Information and Governance spokesperson, the nation is ready to assume great responsibility. And he added, in the field of security, there would always be improvements, challenges and gaps to be filled. Due to the civil wars in Liberia, the UN launched a peacekeeping mission in September 23 to ensure security, rebuild police and military forces from scratch, and disarm rebels. The military in Liberia was one of the longest and largest UN missions in sub-Saharan Africa, and one of the most widely supported, with 42 countries contributing military forces and 35 contributing police personnel.
The United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union with nearly 52%, becoming the first European country to do so. African countries have long been political and economic partners with both the United Kingdom and the European Union. After the Brexit vote, experts on both sides are unsure how trade and relations will unfold, especially in Africa. Keelan Ngala, our Bridge Africa correspondent, joins us in the studio today to discuss the effects on Africa. Briefly state the arguments behind the Brexit and Britain's decision to leave the European Union.
Well, the decision of Britain to exit from the European Union was driven by quite a wide variety of factors, one of which was power. You know, when Britain joined the EU, it also meant that you were losing part of your sovereignty. You could not make all the laws that you wanted to make. And therefore, there were a majority of laws that were made that applied in the United Kingdom, but which unfortunately were made by the European Parliament. And therefore, there were people who felt that it was wrong to live in a country and then the laws are made by someone else. So those proponents, those people who were arguing for the exit of Britain from the European Union were saying that they needed more of their sovereignty. The second thing is jobs. And the argument was that, well, they felt that if Britain exits the European Union, jobs were going to be created back at home because there were bilateral relations, there were multilateral agreements that were already signed with the European Union, and people felt that they were compromising job creation back in Britain. And the third thing was border control. You remember that the wars in Syria, the wars in Iraq, they've been displacing quite a large number of people. And because Britain is part of the European Union, they have to conform to European Union principles on immigration. And therefore, the people who were arguing against continuous stay in the European Union were saying that, well, we can't just allow our borders, throw our borders open to people we can't really control. So, and with terrorism going all around the place, there was a feeling that, well, allowing people to come into the country, people you couldn't stop, could actually bring in terrorists into Britain. So those were some of the arguments that they put up.
What repercussions does the Brexit have on Africa as a whole?
You will have to understand that there are relations that were negotiated on multilateral basis. We need to start renegotiating all those relations. And the time lapse, the periods that you are going to use to do all this is going to take long. Bilateral relations, negotiations really take long when it comes to trade negotiations, for example, and negotiations of other kinds. It's going to take a very, very long time. And therefore, within this time, how do we cope? How do we manage to wriggle through this period, this the time lapse that is going to be used to renegotiate all these things? So those are the effects that Africa is going to face, and therefore Africa needs to adopt other strategies, I think.
And how do you think Africa can deal with the shock of the Brexit?
I think the first thing is that we must begin to create wealth back at home. That is critical, because the notion that Africa can only make wealth when they are, relating to other countries, to me, is wrong. You cannot imagine that the whole of Africa, we are just about, I think about 10% of trade takes place within the continent. We trade more with people from outside than amongst ourselves. And I therefore think that it's time for Africa to begin to encourage intra-African trade. It's going to build wealth and create jobs. And to do that, we need to dismantle the barriers to trade. We need to start harmonizing our tariffs, harmonizing our custom procedures, our tax payment systems. These are the things we need to do in order to dismantle the barriers to trade. Until we do that, it's going to be extremely hard for Africa.
Thank you so much, Kilian.
It's always a pleasure having you.
Cape Verde recorded 11 cases of babies born with microcephaly, a rare birth defect linked to the Zika virus, which reached the archipelago in October of 2015.
9 of these cases reported in Praia and 2 on the island of Mau included a stillborn baby. Dr. Monteiro reported on Thursday at a meeting on the impact of Zika organized by the United Nations in Praia. An epidemiologist from the Ministry of Health, Maria de Lourdes Monteiro, reported that ultrasounds on pregnant women in São Felipe, Fogo Island, south of the archipelago, revealed 3 fetuses were likely to have the malformation at birth between July and August. The country's Ministry of Health said the number of Zika cases are currently low, and the last count conducted shortly before the end of May identified 3 cases, 2 in Praia, the capital located on the island of Santiago, and on the island of Mau. This job continues, but the ministry called for increased awareness during the rainy season, which usually extends from August to October. All suspected babies with microcephaly and their parents are monitored by specialists, including psychologists and neurologists, the Ministry of Health reported. Since the emergence of the virus, Cape Verde has recorded about 7,500 cases, mostly on the islands of Santiago and Fogo. The virus is mainly spread by bites from infected mosquitoes, but can also be transmitted sexually and from mother to fetus. The World Health Organization assured that they would support African countries to step up preparedness efforts for early detection, like it was done in West Africa during the Ebola emergency.
United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, on the commemoration of the drug abuse and illicit trafficking, called on countries and communities to continue on the fight against drug trafficking to improve the lives of everyone destroyed by drug abuse. Today in the studio, we have a Bridge Africa correspondent, Elvis Decom, who is the president of the Association for the Promotion of Youth Leadership, Advocacy, and Volunteerism. He is also the Youth Tobacco Control Agent. So Elvis, thanks so much for joining us in the studio today, first and foremost. And secondly, I would like for you to tell me more about the drug issues that are associated with youth today in Africa.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk on this pertinent issue.
Okay.
Drug abuse, it's something that has been happening way back, and Africa is not left behind. And if we look at the diseases caused by drug abuse, they are the most preventable in the world, the preventable death diseases in the world. So what is happening in Africa is that youths are not left behind. The percentage is growing, given that drug abuse is really varying. It's for different reasons, and we have the different forms which live from alcohol to tobacco, and now those who don't want to consume just what is known globally, they go in for other forms like marijuana, cocaine, and synthetic products which are really dangerous for the health.
How bad do you think the illicit drug use is in Africa today? You know, things like marijuana use, cocaine use, and hard, heavy drugs. How common is the use of these formats?
We have to know that drug use, drug abuse is something which is very delicate, especially amongst youth, given that it is done randomly. So if we start classifying drug abuse, you have to take about age, sex, and if we look into the African context, you notice that in the cities and the big cities and the villages, it's not the same scenario. So if you move into the villages, they'll consume more marijuana because they cultivate it. But given that drug use is really varied from alcohol to tobacco, so there is this silence.
But is alcohol considered drug use?
Abuse. If you consume
if you're
excessive,
abusing it.
Yeah, if you're abusing alcohol.
And what about tobacco? Tobacco is legal.
Yeah.
What about tobacco use amongst the youth and
yeah,
within
just
Cameroon?
to remind us that tobacco is the only legal poison being sold at the moment.
And alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol is not to an extent, because we always ask people, alcohol is a problem when we abuse.
Yes.
So there is a limit for alcohol. But those who abuse, they fall into this category.
And tobacco?
But tobacco is completely not good. It's bad.
Yes, and what are some of the statistics on tobacco use in Africa?
Yeah, in Africa, it's going to depend from adults to youth because, generally doing with what they call the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which was put in place by the United Nations in 2006. When we move into Africa, we'll notice that consumption is different from prevalence. So if we take the number of smokers, it's not the same scene like the number of cigarettes being consumed. So if we come into Africa, the number of cigarettes are small. So if you go globally, you take the number of cigarettes in Africa are just 2% of everything being consumed. But if you come now to the number of smokers, we have 6% of the total. It means that this is a very big market, a growing market for the tobacco industry. So if you compare prevalence to consumption, you will see into it that the market is growing, meanwhile the number of cigarettes are few.
Absolutely.
So this is to say that when we come and look at the figures in Africa, for adults, it's 14% in men. But in women, it's worth like 3%.
And what about drug use in Africa? Do you find that there are facilities for treatment for people who find themselves with an addiction, either to tobacco or heavier drugs?
If we look keenly into drug, given that it has been like a talk of stigma and,
yes,
and something which people are really scared of, we don't speak so much of drug in Africa. You need data for you to be able to gain facilities, but we don't have this data in Africa. So if you look generally, there are just like few countries which have been effective in drug control, like South Africa and Mauritius. So these are the countries which are really developed in Africa. But when you go the other side, the other countries, they're almost at the same level because it's about illicit trade. Yeah,
well, thank you so much for your time, Elvis. We really appreciate you coming in to Bridge Africa this week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Renewable energy is important for every development in a community. This was justified at the 26th Annual World Economic Forum on Africa in Kigali, Rwanda, which focused on connecting Africa's resources through digital transformation. The forum included striking graphics from the International Energy Agency, which demonstrated the percentage of African populations that go without electricity. The world's youngest nation, South Sudan, canceled its Independence Day celebrations to solve the drop in its economy caused by civil war that left thousands dead.
According to the Minister of Information, Microcephaly, the decision not to celebrate the July 9 Independence Day is to reserve the country's budget and spend the money on more important issues. The country's economy had been battered by high inflation caused by the war, corruption, and the failure of the oil industry, which accounts for 98% of government revenues. Since the country gained its independence from Sudan in 2011, its first and current president always led over a military parade and a celebration of its independence, even at the height of the civil war that broke out 3 years ago. President Salva Kiir, however, would be expected to address the nation, which just came out of a civil war with a peace process being implemented following the return of former rebel leader and Vice President Riek Machar to the country's capital of Juba. Despite the UN-brokered peace deal currently in place, there are still pockets of violence perpetrated by militia groups which pay no regard to either the president or his vice. The latest story of violence was reported to have claimed over 40 lives in the town of Wau.
The 34th commemoration of the International Day of Music was worth celebrating, as two brothers used the day to continue to create awareness through music to fight stigmatization of people with vulnerability. On Bridge Africa this week, we have in our midst the musical group, The White African, to talk on the focus and choice of their music. Thank you so much for coming into the studio today. We appreciate it. So tell me about the name of your group, The White African, and how long you all have been doing music.
Hello Africa. I am Risky.
And I'm Flashy.
Okay.
And this is The White African Music.
Okay.
Yeah. So, White African Music is a group of two albino brothers, Flash and Risky.
Are you two twins?
Nah,
We're brothers, but spiritual twins.
Spiritually,
Musically speaking.
twins.
But mem, mer, mem, pair, or
Yes.
the same mother, same father?
Yes.
Okay.
Same mother, same father.
Who's the oldest?
Well, I'm the elder brother.
Okay, awesome. So tell me about the group. How long have you guys been singing?
Been singing like 15 years today.
Okay.
Exactly.
And what type of music do you perform?
Well, we perform hip hop because we got drawn into music through hip hop. So we basically do hip hop, but we're trying to do a blend of hip hop mixed with some African instrumentals. And hip hop still an African element in it. It's the language. It's Pidgin English,
Okay.
which is still part of African
I love
blend.
Pidgin. It's one of my favorite languages.
So that's what we're doing. We do is hip hop
Okay.
in an African way, on hip hop rhythms, mixed also with African rhythms and all that. That's white African music.
So why did you choose the name of your group as the White African? It's clear that the two of you are albinos and people would know that, but why call your group the White African?
Well, as you yourself said it, we called our group White African Music because it's a story of two guys with white skin living in a black society or in an African society who faced a lot of difficulties and used music as a tool to get through all of that. So it's white guys going through a black society, African society using music. White African music.
Absolutely. You know, and recently, from the Pope to the International Albino Awareness Days that happened last week, many people have been talking about, you know, mutual respect for albinos. So have you all faced any discrimination, you know, growing up or since you've been in the music industry?
Yeah, we face discrimination. That's what really pushed us into creating what we call white African music to really create awareness. We faced discrimination basically when we were growing up. So music got us. We saw music as the only tool to use to create that awareness.
So what type of discrimination did you face?
Discrimination basically on rejection by your peers at school. Rejection because of your skin colors. Maybe you get pushed out of the society where you're supposed to belong, maybe out of your friends because of your skin color. Not even basically because they discriminate. Yeah, they do discriminate against you because you have a different skin color. Maybe you can't even adapt to the environment in which they play and all that.
And you got a lot of people trying to limit you depending on what you can do and what you can't do. For example, when you get to tell people you could succeed using music, they get to trying to limit you because you're an albino.
What are the biggest myths about albinos that you think need to be killed today?
The biggest myth, if you look on social media, on the news, internationally, locally, what they're talking about, it's albinos being sacrificed.
Right.
Yeah, I think that those are some of.
So that's not happening?
It's happening. It's
Right.
reality.
But why? So it's not a myth, it's actually happening,
But there's a myth around it. It's happening. It's the consequence of a myth. Which, according to this myth, people believe in the African context, they believe albinos bring some kind of luck. So they try to create like magical lotions with it and all that. That's the myth behind it. But I must say, it's not a reality of what they're doing. They just use it as a means to manipulate. I mean, witch doctors just use it as a means to manipulate other people. You understand? Because maybe they see albinos are more vulnerable to be caught. Because if you want to sacrifice a human being, you need a special environment to catch the human being and all that. So they believe since an albino can maybe see well under the sun, you can easily get to him. You understand?
Okay. So. Thanks so much. And can you guys maybe give me a small sample of, one of your songs? Just a few seconds.
Yeah. K-I-N-G
with hip hop, I get another name, Albina. K-I-N-G with hip hop, I get another name. They be the holla, say they want baller. Who you be the traffic baller? Green, red, yellow, superstar, Albina.
Thanks so much. We appreciate you. And you guys keep going with your movement.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching Bridge Africa this week. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Bridge Africa 24 and get your top headline stories on our website, bridgeafrica24.com. Peace and blessings.